welcome to Trauma Interventions. Tonight we are talking about habituated patterns. And if you're listening to this at a different time than this afternoon or this morning, we're talking about habituated patterns. I'm glad that you could join us. I wanted to talk about some of the, I guess what maybe a few years ago people used to talk about as habits. First, I was giving a few little comments before I started recording here with the group, talking about how we develop habituated patterns often as a coping strategy when we're just at the point of functioning. And for those who have PTSD, depression, acute anxiety, OCD, some other mental health challenges, it's often the habituated patterns that get us through. And that's a wonderful thing. I have no complaints. There is a time when they no longer serve us, where we're moving from functioning to thriving. And those habituated patterns are like sand in your shoe. You know, they're just irritating and they're small and in many ways insignificant. And so we struggle with, why is this holding me back? One of the first ones I wanted to talk about was procrastination, putting things off. I think that often happens when we're in survival mode and we feel like, I just don't have it. I just absolutely cannot deal. And because I cannot deal, I'm going to put this off. The problem is, once our brains and our bodies and our emotional intelligent selves get habituated in procrastinating, it's really hard to stop that pattern. Or maybe it's hard when we're just trying to use brute force to change it. I'm going to give some ideas later of ways to change it that hopefully will make it less difficult. Another problem we have is stress eating, where we either eat everything in sight or aren't even aware that we're eating. We find ourselves in the kitchen with something open and our hand literally in the cookie jar, or we can't eat because we're so stressed and we lose our appetite and we're nauseous. That's often happens when we're in a PTSD situation, and then it can be hard to extricate ourselves from those patterns. Circuitous negative thinking, addictions of all kinds, and there are many. You can be addicted to reading novels and just escape every minute that you have into some kind of escape. Obsessing, where we go over and over, that sometimes almost has a superstitious energy to it, because we feel like if I worry about it, if I obsess about it, then it's less likely to happen, sort of that superstitious place. We also often have habituated patterns when it comes to money and money issues, because when you're in survival mode, sometimes you can't afford to even deal with money. You can't think about what you're saving. You can't think about what you're spending or what you're earning. You're just in the trenches trying to come out with your life. And so money seems like a luxury to even focus on at all. And yet, if we want to thrive, we need to make sure that the habituated patterns that we have with money are of our choosing, are not stuck back in that foxhole where we're just trying to come out with our body intact. We can engage negative people and keep them in our lives. How many of us have kept negative people in our lives far too long? And we have all these reasons why. Maybe it's because we feel some distorted sense of loyalty because they were with us through the hard time, or they've helped us sometimes when we've been struggling. And we feel like we would be disloyal. Self-flagellation, where no matter what we're doing, we're down on ourselves and we're calling ourselves names. This little picture in the bottom right-hand corner of two people literally flagellating themselves. is a good example of what we literally do in our minds. And somehow it's almost like if I'm harder on myself than anyone else can be, then maybe it won't be so bad. Or it's a way we had of trying to avoid the pitfalls of a toxic abusive family, or a toxic abusive medical training program or residency, or a toxic work environment. We become chronic worriers because if we worry about it and anticipate, then maybe we can do something even though we feel like we're frozen in time and can't do anything, feeling powerless. We avoid, we escape through media. I can't tell you how many people secretly admit to me that they spend hours on Facebook sometimes rather than working on their business, or rather than working on their relationship, or journaling, or some of the other, or taking good care of themselves. You know, it's this sort of neutral land of nothingness sometimes. Even when you find those little inspiring quotes, or you find, you know, some kind of political argument going on that you tap into for entertainment, you know, what's the value of that later, really, truly? It's just a way of escaping and avoiding some of what we need to attend to. We neglect our health. We develop patterns of hypervigilance where we are exerting and efforting a lot in order to have a sense that we're keeping ourselves safe. And we repeat bad relationships. And we do that because we're either stuck in rescuing people, or because maybe we don't feel worthy of something better. It's a habituated pattern from our childhoods. So we feel like it's familiar. Oh, you know, I was abandoned my whole childhood, and now I'm with someone who keeps going out and having affairs. This feels familiar. You must be my father or my mother, or you feel like home, even though it's really, really bad for us. And sometimes we repeat those patterns over and over again. But there's hope. There's rapid pattern integration, which is what I call it. And it's sort of a hybrid of several modalities out there that I have found to really, really help people. There are 4 places that we go when we're wanting to disrupt a pattern and integrate something new. The first is to really, really develop your observer self. And so that's where you become the scientist, and you ask yourself, if you were someone else looking in, what would you observe? Sometimes we can do it from inside ourselves if we've had a lot of practice over the years, and we could just go inside and ask ourselves what we're noticing. But because some of us have distorted ways of thinking, we have a very, very unhealthy inner critic. Depending on that inner self to observe isn't always safe. And so one of the ways to notice whether this is true for you or not is to make some observations from your inner self, and notice if it feels like it is congruent with what someone else who knows you would say. So if you make observations about your life, you just go inside and you assess what the issues are around whatever is up for you right now. And you make a list of what all the issues are, what you're noticing the pattern is. And then pause and say to yourself, now, if I asked a totally objective outside observer, would they agree with my list, or would they observe something else? If I was asking my best friend, what would my best friend or partner say about what they observe as my patterns? If there's a big disparity between what your inner self says and what someone else would observe, then let's go with what someone else would observe right now, because it could be that that inner self is so damaged, or that you have internalized false beliefs from indoctrination or gaslighting or abuse that you can't totally yet trust what you observe. That's not forever, that's just for right now. So the first thing you want to do is have a really objective sense of what's going on. What is the pattern? And this is without judgment. It doesn't matter if the pattern is I procrastinate and have, let's say something really extreme here. I have falsified patient charts because I've gotten so far behind. And I have a lot of shame about that. No one was harmed, but you know, my procrastination is an issue. So what I would want you to do is write down the title, procrastination, and then all the ways you procrastinate, but without judgment, not calling yourself names, not making excuses, not trying to justify or explain, just the facts. And then once you've observed what the pattern is, I'm going to go to the next screen to help identify, oh, wrong screen, sorry. Let's see if I can just, oh, we're gonna have to go through this again, I apologize. So we're revisiting habituated patterns. If someone is watching this later as it's recorded, I went the wrong way with my mouse here, and so we're needing to go through this again. But what we're talking about is observing, identifying, which I see is spelled wrong, feeling and integrating. So if we're in the observation part of the cycle, we want to identify what is the pattern, does it keep happening, and how does it serve? Those are the things that I want you to, if we go back to that previous screen, observing. So in the observing category, the very first part of the pie, we're wanting to say, what is the pattern? Does it keep happening? So if it's, you know, if it's a habituated pattern, it probably does. So the does it keep happening, identify there how often it's happening, how much of a problem. Is it just happening at work? Is it happening at work and home? Is it happening in personal relationships? And then how does it serve? And how does it serve, if we're going back to that perhaps disturbing example of procrastinating by falsifying something on a patient record, and if that's happened more than once, to say, okay, what is the pattern? The pattern is that I procrastinate. And when I procrastinate, I sometimes try to reinvent history because I'm afraid of the fact that I procrastinated. Does that keep happening? No, it's only happened twice, but I'm afraid of it happening again. How does it serve me? Well, it serves by keeping me out of trouble. You know, I feel so guilty and I'm so afraid. I think that guilt and fear will keep me from doing it again. You know, there's usually some way that it serves us, whatever the pattern is. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. If we're obsessing, if we're worrying, how does that serve us? Well, there's a part of me that feels like if I worry about it, maybe it won't come true. If I constantly worry that something's going to happen to my son who's out at a basketball game with his school, then maybe he won't be in a bus crash on the way home. Then maybe he'll come home on time and he won't go out with friends after. You know, then maybe, so we have all these then maybes. So what is the pattern? Does it keep happening? How does it serve? Then when we go to the identify slide, which is next, where is the pattern? So we really need to identify on the second, second right part of the pie there, if we're identifying, oh my goodness, I went back to that slide again here. I'm going to just take care of this. Well, I thought I was going to. here. Let me go to this and delete, and to this and delete. Okay, you're being very patient. So we want to play this slide. So when we're going into the identifying portion of the circle, we want to identify where the pattern resides. Is it in the outside world? Is it in our emotional world? Or is it in relationships? That is really, really very important, because if it's in the outside world, then often it's behaviors that we will change. Even before we feel differently, we're going to change the behavior so that we can do it differently in the outside world. If it's emotional, then it's much more about inner work. And if it's relational, then it's much more about patterns of relationship and how we connect. So the first slide is about the pattern. The second is about, the first slide is about observing. The second slide is about identifying where this takes place. And then the third portion of the pie is, what do we feel? So when we go forward to the feeling square, which is down at the bottom left of the slide, how does it feel? How does it feel emotionally? Where do you feel it in your body? And this is really, really, really important, especially for those of us that have PTSD. And then once we've identified where we feel it in our body and what that's like, then what wants to happen? So an example of this would be, how does it feel? I feel ashamed. I feel guilty. I feel embarrassed. I feel humiliated. Those are all feelings. Where do I feel it? Well, the embarrassment I feel in my face flushes, I blush. The humiliation, I feel it in my head sort of sinks down. The shame, I feel in my chest. I notice that I kind of move forward, hunch my shoulders. The blame comes from my mind. So I think when you identify how it feels and then where you feel it in your body, it becomes much more of a somaticized experience. And that's really, really important, because that's what stress, abuse, extreme stress that takes a trauma, that's what it does to us. It not only creates emotional feelings, we have the physical experience, then we have the emotional response, and then we actually somaticize and feel it in our bodies. And then once you feel it in your body, what wants to happen? Sometimes what wants to happen is we just want to run. We want to escape it. I want to just run full force where the wind is hitting my cheeks and my face cools down, where I hold my chest back and open, where I don't feel that heaviness in my chest, and where I get my mind to shut up and quit blaming and shaming me. So to identify how it feels, where we feel it, and what wants to happen. And then the million-dollar question is, what's keeping that from happening? What is the obstacle? And much of the time, the obstacle is, I don't know how. And so that's okay. There's no shame in that, but to identify what the obstacle is. I'm afraid of what people might think. What would my friends think if I quit my job? So how does it feel? I feel constantly stressed and tensed. Where do I feel it? I get headaches all the time. I have chronic migraines. What wants to happen? I want to be pain-free. I want this pressure in my head to leave. What is the obstacle? The only way I know to get that pressure to leave is to leave my job, and I'm afraid of what people will think. What will my friends think? What will my spouse think? They're going to think I'm a weakling. They're going to think that I'm I'm not up to par. And so we've identified what we feel, where we feel it, what wants to happen, and what the obstacle is. And then finally, once we felt it, then the work is to remove that obstacle. And that sometimes you can't do that alone. Sometimes you need expert advice on how to remove that obstacle, what to do. You can find that advice in a book. You can find that advice in counseling. Either, sometimes it's peer counseling with a friend. Sometimes it's actual formal counseling or coaching with someone like myself, or in your mastermind group. Find the antidote to removing the obstacle. If you're wanting to quit your job and you're afraid of what other people would think, then the antidote is to create ways in which you could have an exit strategy and then communicate that exit strategy to those around you so that you remove that obstacle. You're free. Once you do that, anchor it in your body by asking yourself how it would feel if you knew that you were leaving that job and you had an exit strategy and all of your friends and family supported you, that you didn't have any external criticism. How would my head feel? Oh, my face, my countenance, my face, I would be smiling. My head would feel clear. My heart would feel open. My chest would feel light. My belly would feel comfortable. My feet would feel the ground beneath them. They would no longer be numb or disconnected from the rest of my body. My shoulders would feel like ready to move forward. And so once you anchor it in not only emotional feelings, but physical feelings, then to repeat that enough so that you begin to integrate it as a new experience. And sometimes you can use neuro-linguistic work like tapping on your cheek or tapping two fingers together. So as you are feeling the feeling, once you've removed the obstacle, you're actually anchoring it in your body. And you repeat it enough times that then when you're integrating this new pattern, disrupting the old, bringing in a new pattern, a new solution, you feel free. So once again, I always have the post-traumatic stress slide to remind people that when you get into a place where the PTSD is active, you also have often have intrusive flashbacks or flooding of emotion. The desire is to avoid. After avoidance, we also often have the arousal and reactivity. Our cognition becomes affected with short-term memory, our ability to express ourselves, we might be depressed, and then mood regulation becomes an issue where we are cut off and shut down, or incredibly sad, despondent. And so if your PTSD symptoms are active, to acknowledge that you've been triggered and to use some of the tools that we've suggested previously to help you get back to that center place. So now it's time to share.